So I did an undergrad degree in environmental science, and then I realized, you know what, because I really want to make a, what's the biggest difference I can make on the environment was my goal. But I realized that certain policies get developed or certain laws get changed if there's not a lot of money at stake, okay? So it was really about the money. So I started working on environmental finance, and I did, just to tell you how close this issue is to my heart. In my second year of grad school, the director of the Environmental Finance Center came to me and said, hey, the state of North Carolina wants us to look at the SRF program nationally, and to see if they can develop an affordability program for the state of North Carolina. Do you want to do that? It's like, sure, yeah. And I've never looked back. I've been working on affordability ever since. So my specialty is environmental finance, how you pay for environmental projects, particularly water, and then within there, how do you set rates, etc., and not leave out low-income folks? How do you set rates while considering that? How do you develop programs? Yeah. All right. So I'll start on this side of it here. Yeah. Caribbean environmental management is one of the areas of IB Environmental. It's sort of the pro bono area right now, but we'll work on that, right? Kind of leading up to, I do stormwater and green infrastructure financing. That's been like a secondary. If I had two focus areas, that has been the second one. Like, how do you fund green infrastructure? Is it more expensive than gray infrastructure? I was really involved in the ARRA back in 2009-10. I had worked with the State Revolving Fund before, but the year Obama's administration said 10% must be reserved, GPR, Green Project Reserve, for green infrastructure projects. There wasn't even standing room. People were flowing out the doors. Wow. Because for the first time in the SRF program, there was like a partial grant, which is a four-letter word. You do not say grant with SRF. What you say is principal forgiveness, which means you don't have to pay back all that you borrowed. But it's supposed to be a purely loan program. So I wrestled with those guys on how to tweak a loan program to have even partial grant. Of course, the environmental community was very happy about this, and they showed up, just like you did, to say, hold on, how is this green, But the fact is, the water utilities were not giving us green projects. We were begging for them, and we were saying, just like a one-page business case on how this is green. They're coming up with things like, people were like, that's just putting an aeration pump in a pond, Stacey. I'm like, okay, all right, let's put this one aside, right? So we would, I'm gonna try to wear the utility hat because I know it pretty well, and I do empathize with some of their challenges and issues. So don't shoot me, but that I'm gonna give you that perspective because I think it's useful for you guys to know how they think, use their language, empathize with their issues, and try to help them solve them. And that's how we can get these two groups, working together. So they didn't know much about green projects then, and they didn't know how to put it in their budgets and do their accounting for it. And so they would really like to avoid those projects if they could. And they felt that they could do more, get more bang for their buck on gray infrastructure. Right? And there were a lot of questions about green. The good thing about that is it kind of gave the stimulus that I think the industry needed. And now we have green projects on the ground because of that 10% GPR, where we can monitor and tweak and learn and that kind of thing. So anyway, so I've done some of that. And then this is a very specific thing that I do in Georgia, which is I like to tell people where the money is. So believe it or not, the State Revolving Fund folks, the people who give money out, loans, maybe more loans than grants, some of them are stressed out because they're not getting enough applications, okay? And the federal government gave them the capital grant and they match at the state level, and the federal government is over them. They have these terms, liquefied, and why haven't you gotten the money out the door? So they're under some pressure, right? But they need good projects that are well developed that can be repaid. They need a repayment funding stream. But yeah, so I work with some of the funders. There's a group in Georgia that I facilitate, and it's like a support group for funders. They all have problems like, we want to take our application process online. That will help us get more applications. And then there's one group who's already done that, and so they're like sharing and supporting each other. And they're very stressed out about their federal overseers saying, why do you have more money still? Why aren't you getting out the door, right? But we know for some communities, even a low interest loan is hard to pay back, so they want to try. So that's part of what we do at IB Environmental. And then really this is the heart of it, the water affordability and equity piece of local utility and rate setting and that kind of thing. Okay, so in terms of an outline, I'll give you a little bit of background, then we'll talk about rate setting. And I have my timekeeper in here, we'll just adjust his suit. And then after talking about rate setting, generally, we'll talk about how you can do rate setting with affordability in mind. But the rates can only take you so far. All right, even well-managed, and I want you to really hopefully buy into this, even utilities, water utilities that are taking care of the natural resource, so they don't have 50% of the water leaking out the pipes, and have a nice financial reserve set aside, even those utilities, they may have rates that are unaffordable for some sector of the population. And unfortunately, like Sylvia said, it's a growing sector because water and sewer rates and stormwater have been outstripping the rates of inflation over the last several years. So rates are going up, and I'm sorry, again, bad news, shoot me if you want, they're not gonna go down. Water and sewer rates are not gonna go down. They're gonna keep rising. So even if a utility right now has a small sector of folks who can't pay, that's only gonna grow. So this problem isn't going anywhere. So we need to address it, right? But rates can only get us so far. There is gonna be a small amount, maybe a large amount, and a growing number of folks who cannot pay. And we have to help them outside of the rate structure, is my theory. Okay, so I'll talk to you a little bit about customer assistance programs outside of rate setting. So in terms of background, you need to go and tell the utilities this and support them on these, right? These are mutually beneficial. Remember that if they operate and maintain their system, they fix leaks, they even do leak detection to figure out where leaks may be before it starts to like make the road implode or whatever, that lowers costs. Once the utility has lowered costs because they're doing good O&M or good operation and maintenance, it means that they don't have to raise the rates as much and affordability is mitigated, all right? So you push that for different reasons. Yes, you want them to conserve water, take care, leave more water in the rivers for the plants and animals. But it also helps them reduce their costs and ultimately improves affordability. So that's something to support them on, and if you want common ground, here you go. This is one of them, right? Efficiency and conservation as well support this whole. So a lot of the folks, I'm going to make a general statement here, a lot of the folks who are having problems with water tend to be tenants. And again, depends on the state, depends on the city, but generally across the nation, low-income folks are renters, and they are paying the water utility bills, and the landlord may be paying the mortgage, let's say. The landlord doesn't have much incentive to fix a leaking toilet. He or she is not paying the water bill, right? So you have these slumlords who don't care about that, and these folks are already low income, so they may not be wasting the water, but it just may be leaking, because they have older plumbing fixtures that the landlord does not have an incentive to fix. So Portland, Oregon was mentioned already this morning. They are sort of like the trendsetters on a lot of this affordability stuff. They don't only help folks with bills. They say, we can help manage the resource better and help you with your bill by going in and fixing your leaking toilets. A lot of utilities feel like they don't want to go there. They have issues with public versus private domain. And I'm sure, our lawyer friends can tell us more about that, but the liability of going on to private property to fix toilets scares them, and they don't want to do that. Some have gone ahead and done it. Atlanta does it too, right? Some of the bigger ones. So there are examples out there. Maybe push your utility partners in the direction of, let's see how Atlanta did it. Portland's been doing it for a while. How have they gotten around some of these liability issues? It would really help the low-income customers sort of more immediately, and it's probably a little bit more, what is the term I've been hearing folks use? It's more humane, and in terms of human dignity. You're not helping me with a handout giving me help with my bill every month, but you're just having me fix the leaks. It's a one-time fix, and then my bill goes down every month, right? And now maybe I can afford it, and I don't need further help, right? Okay, this is, accounting makes some people's eyes glaze over. I'm trying to make one point here, so hang with me. So fund accounting is a system of accounting for state and local governments. And the water utilities, like you mentioned, are part of the local government, whether it's a stormwater utility, water and wastewater combined, water separate, etc. this is the type of accounting system that they have to subscribe to. So it's called fund accounting, and the fund that money goes into on the local government setting here, it has to do both with the source of the funds and how you're going to use it properly. Proper is not accidentally put in here. That's the point on it. So this is what, this is the chart I came up with for fund accounting, right? So you have the government fund, or the general fund here is where tax money goes in. So that's the big one, and it's kind of the catch-all. If something doesn't fit, if money doesn't fit anywhere else, it goes to general. Think of it like that. Then you have special revenue, debt service. Enterprise fund, I'll give you the answer to the question here, is where you want your water and sewer and stormwater utilities to be. That's where they're supposed to be. And the word enterprise might sound kind of businessy and private sector on purpose. They are supposed to be independently funded. They're not supposed to be getting a whole lot of tax money from the general fund. Now, there are good cases for exceptions, but generally, good financial management, local government 101, is that these are independent, standalone. Money isn't transferring back and forth between the different funds, right? So that's something that you should understand, that these systems or water utilities are proprietary enterprise funds, and they should act that way, and you guys can pressure them to keep acting that way. So they're different, depending on the state. As we acknowledge, it's challenging to talk to a group from different states. It's fun and exciting and interesting, but it's challenging because you probably don't know what an authority is. And in some places they're districts, so they may not fit this exact model is what I'm saying. So I put them off to the side. In general, an authority and a district, they actually have more flexibility than a bona fide local government enterprise fund, okay? So don't let them give you too many excuses either. They should have more flexibility, generally. Okay, so the point of all of this, let's ignore that. This is just giving you examples of different kinds of funds, and I was gonna ask you where you think a new wastewater treatment plant should come from. And you might want to say enterprise fund, but it really is capital project fund. It's a special fund that's set up not to just do a little fix, it's to build a new wastewater treatment plant. It should be a capital fund, right? So I'll let you look back here. So that should be here, right? So anyway, the point of all of that is this nice quote. I think this is it's from Jersey Waterworks, and a similar group was mentioned this morning. But this really was put together, this paper, by somebody from the NRDC. And I like the way he put it. Generally, if you prohibit the transfer of the utility, so usually the money is going in one direction, right? The water, sewer, stormwater system is like this, the cash cow. And the money is going to plug holes in the budget for fences, whatever they can't find the money for, they'll pull it out. And that is why we are where we are right now. That is why unfortunately, it's not just Maryland. It's not just Baltimore, like the lady said this morning. All of the older cities in the US really have used their water and sewer systems as the cash cow for decades. And they ignored the infrastructure updates, which is why we have to raise the rates so sharply now. We can't go back and fix that. It's done. We need to raise the rates. They need to take care of their infrastructure. Otherwise, we'll have more leaking and more catastrophes that affect public and environmental health. So I like this quote, and it's from a good source. This is a good paper on affordability. I try to just pull different quotes from different sources so that you can always go back to this and click on his report here. Okay. All right. So we talk about funding methods, also to make one point. So this was the point of the background so far. Don't let them do fund transfers unless they have a good reason. And what I like to say is repeated, large, arbitrary fund transfers are not a good idea. If it happens,
large, arbitrary fund transfers.
So repeated, large, arbitrary, and not a good is not a best management practice, right? Sometimes you have to do it once. There's a hurricane. There's we got cyber attacked and you can send out a bill for 4 months or something. There are the exceptions. There are ways to, if the city manager spends 50% of her time answering calls on the water and sewer utility, then okay, we can cover half of her salary from the water utility or the wastewater utility. But you have to have some kind of defensible, logical, that arbitrary word addresses that. Question?
I just want to say, it sounds like they're using this other, or the big people are using the little funds as like petty cash.
Yeah, to fill holes in the budget. Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot, and that's you have to look at their financial reports and look for that.
And they
You
probably plan, they probably work it into their plan.
Sure.
So where are we gonna put the water money?
Yeah, where are we going to put the 10% of the
Yeah.
water money? Oh yeah, yeah. So okay, the common funding methods. When you talk about how a water utility or water system or wastewater pays for a project, they can save in advance, just like you do with your personal finances, right? If you want to go to Hawaii, you can save in advance and then pay for those plane tickets and hotel. You can well, maybe this doesn't work for Hawaii, pay as you go. They have, some of the large utilities have millions of dollars coming in every month. So they can do a leak detection or a pipe replacement project on the go. They just do X number of miles every month as the money comes in, right? That's what pay as you go means. Pay afterwards, not everybody's favorite. This is everybody's favorite. Pay afterwards is somebody lends you the money, the revolving fund, for instance, and you repay it over time. And grants are everybody's favorite. Well, somebody gives you the money and you don't even have to pay it back, right? So a note, another way to look at it, I'll cover some of these, not like assessments, impact fees, taxes, etc. Where does a utility get money from? Ultimately, it could be a grant, it could be a loan, bonds, we won't go into the different types of bonds. And now, just put a note for the bigger cities that have more capacity. The city of Atlanta did the first ever environmental impact bond for their water and wastewater system. And I think it's going really well. They were on a webinar. Somebody mentioned this in one of my webinars. They were co-presenting on a webinar with me. So tell your water utility folks that they should check this out and consider it as a funding option. User fees is where I'm going to spend most of the time on the idea of where do they get their money from, okay? So I have to hit grants first again. This is not going to be popular. Everybody loves grants, but they're not completely free money. This came up last night, and I'm sorry I came in late. I only heard about half of your introductions. But I think you were saying what happens in the communities or Sierra Club when we have our projects, because it's a hot button. Affordability is hot button right now. Let's face it. We'll get funding, foundations, etc., to give you money now to the affordability program, but then another hot button issue comes on, and they may not want to fund affordability anymore through grants. Then what do? Your whole program falls apart. And so that is the downside of grants. Yeah. Grants are not really free. You guys know how much staff time you put into applying for a grant. Mm-hmm. If you win the grant, good for you. If you don't, how do you really justify all that time and energy you put into it, right? The grant can take months to process applications. In the meantime, here's this person who's available now who would be perfect as a project director. If we win that grant, we can't decide, we don't know. Often there are lots of strings. The reporting, now there's more percentage match required, because I would do that too. If there was the Berahzer foundation, I would tell you, you have to put some skin in the game. Because I don't want you to just apply for my money just because you think you might have a good chance, right? I want to see that your community or your system really wants that. So that's becoming more popular too. And this one right here, because of how highly competitive the whole grant world is right now, it exacerbates all of these. They get more applications, they take longer to review them. You have to spend more staff time and money doing a better application. You got to put some maps in there and some pictures, and so all of this gets exacerbated. And then they're difficult to sustain. And I had a perfect, example of that last night, or a testimony. Even for water and sewer utilities, sometimes they in the construction grant days, they used to just get it was probably more at some point, they would just get the money to rebuild the system. All right, well that doesn't happen anymore, so let's focus on asset management. You have to take care of the resources, you have to do the O&M, etc., operation and maintenance, because you want the longest life out of that equipment and that infrastructure, because there is no money from the federal government just to give you a grant. And I think you're right, that would solve a lot of this, but there's a downside to that. They did not take care, the water and sewer sector did not take care of those resources. It's you buy your teenage kid a car versus you tell them they have to raise the money to buy the car. Which teenager is going to change the oil? The one whose parents bought the car, or the one who had to work after school? That's kind of what, it's kind of a derogatory example, but I do tell them that, and at the water utility conferences. So grants aren't really free. Then I used to have a nice chart that illustrated what she was saying before, that all the money was coming from the federal government for water and sewer funding, and now it's down here. And the money is coming now from local and state for water and sewer infrastructure, and that's just how it is, Tiny exceptions, but it's not going to go back. Okay, in terms of finding loans and grants, even though I said I don't like grants very much, right? They have a role to play, but this is just a couple places where you don't qualify to apply for half of these or more, but you can point out to the water utilities that you're working with where they can find money. So this is a couple, maybe a year or two old from the I say new, but it's been around for 3 or 4 years. EPA has a new water infrastructure, I'm gonna mess up the name. They call it the Water Finance Clearinghouse. They call it the Water Finance Center. But they have this clearinghouse online where you can go and you can look for funds and also resources and tools on water. Stormwater, drinking water, wastewater. And so I pulled these slides directly from the EPA. But it's a free resource. You can go in, you can put your community, the area, the geography, what type of project you're trying to fund, and it will spit out some stuff that you can start with. For example, it will spit out, a list of, I can't read these here, but it just gives you an example of it, and you can download as an Excel file the results that you get and start there. And of course, some of them you'll be able to eliminate for yourself, but it'll give you resources or potential resources to look for loans and grants. This is another place you can look for loans and grants. It's from the Environmental Finance Center Network. It's a little bit efcnetwork.org. If you go to resources, it says funding sources by state or territory. Because I worked on this grant, we had to do one of these tables for each state and each territory. Yeah, we were going to Puerto Rico. I went to Puerto Rico. I didn't go to Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. But we had to do a workshop in each state and territory, and we had to do a table of the funding sources that are relevant. So point these to your water utility partners. You have to bring something to the table, right? Don't just attack them all the time and tell them they're not doing this right, they're not doing that right. Did you know about this resource? And if it's possible, we can partner with you on this, right? I see it as sort of an antagonistic relationship, and I do see the world, I see the glass is half empty, so I'm not usually a rose-colored glasses, optimistic kind of gal. But I do see the tension, and we need to kind of overcome that, and there are opportunities to do that. So bring something to them as a peace offering. If there is a lot of negative history in your particular relationship, it sounds like you need this after going to those public hearings and talking about the concrete pipes. Okay, so that's where you get a map. When the map comes up, you click on your state, and it brings up a table for that state. Okay, a couple examples of EPA loans. This is the SRF program, and what I like to do is pull it directly from EPA. This is how EPA describes the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, right? So you see the 20% match that came up this morning. I'm not going to recreate graphics when they have it, I might critique the graphic that they came up with, but anyway, this is pretty good. And it shows you the types of projects. Now, who is eligible depends on the state, like we were saying. Unfortunately, we can't give you exactly who's eligible in your state. In Georgia, it's only local governments, cities and counties, and like those special authorities, etc. No private entity is eligible for SRF funds on the drinking water or clean water side in Georgia. In different states, it's a more diverse list. The types of projects that they would fund, EPA gives them suggestions, gave them a very stern suggestion with the Green Project Reserve back in 2010 or so, but the states get to decide. So for you to lobby your states and show them how they should be more open to different types of projects like green infrastructure or affordability, that's a role that you can play, right? So that's a place that you guys can engage in. This is a similar graphic for the clean water, or the CWSRF. Similar in terms of how it's structured. But again, some of the affordability pieces are, the terms are up to 30 years. Some states, in terms of affordability, just quickly on these things, they are lowering the interest rate. It's already low, but they are lowering it for communities who are applying that have low income. So that's something else that SRF programs can do, and if they're not doing it, you can suggest that, right? And there's precedence. Georgia's doing it, a couple other states are doing it too, and I'm happy if you want to contact me for specifics about these things, to share examples with you. All right, so going back to this one, where do they get the money from? Different sources, but we're talking about user fees mainly now because that's where it ultimately comes from. On the odd chance that a utility gets the grant, be very happy for them, applaud them, that's great. Most of them are not gonna get grants. They're gonna get loans that they have to repay. So user fees or rates are how you repay your loans. This is just a generic slide on user fees, but we're gonna talk about rate setting now.
County conservation boards apply for those funds? They want to protect a park?
It depends on the state, yeah. Not in Georgia, but in some states they might be able to. But there's always the collaboration partnership card that, in theory, a lot of, even grant funders love. All right, so this is a great point that you made here. I happen to be doing some work for South Bend, Indiana, so I just put a screenshot of what I did. I wanted to find out when their board meetings are. And sometimes the board would actually have a special meeting on rate setting. You just go to their website. Sometimes you have to dig around a little bit. I can't give you a secret formula. Click here, then there. It depends on the community. But show up at some of those meetings. And one, to really genuinely hear what they're dealing with. That gives you the insight. They're really struggling with X, Y, and Z, How can I help them there and help myself at the same time? But that's some boards, all the meetings are supposed to be public. So when I say a board, this is the group that determines rates, etc. They're the governing board for the water system, all right? Okay, what goes into setting rates for next year? Would it provide sufficient cost recovery?
I'm sorry, I lost track. Could
Would
you
it-
please rephrase that?
Will it provide sufficient cost recovery? Yeah. So, what does sufficient cost recovery mean, right? Are we following state law? It was alluded to this morning, and there's a great report on that. In terms of affordability, at least, it's a good idea to follow state law. If you're a utility, don't ask them to do anything that's against the state law unless you have a way that they can do it. There are workarounds, right? That sometimes we have to resort to the workarounds. Are we allocating the cost to the right customers? This is implying, and I haven't translated this slide for you. This is what I talked to water utilities with, but this is an equity thing. I won't put the word equity there because it turns some people off in the water utility industry, But this is equity, right? Are the people who are using the most water paying the most?
Yes.
Are the industries paying their fair share of what it's costing to run our system versus our residential customers? All right? So that's equity is built in there, but we'll talk more about equity today, of course. Will our customers understand the rates? So we want the rates to do all of these things. We want them to be understandable as well. And beyond understanding, can they pay these rates, okay? So, and then the utility supposedly has priorities. They should go through an exercise where they actually list their priorities in order. And sometimes the rate design and structure that they have does not align with their priorities at all. And that's not effective, right? Don't say those are your priorities if you're not going to reflect it in your rate structure, is what I would say. So this, again, is utility speak. I'm wearing that. I'm going to find out how much a hard hat is and get one. But I'm wearing that hat right now, right? The water utility sort of hat. This is the Bible of rate setting in the water utility world. It's from the American Water Works Association. It's lovingly called the M1 Manual, but the real name is Principles of Water Rates, Fees, and Charges. I don't know how much it is. I got my copy for free because I helped to write the affordability chapter. They renew this every few years, and there were only a few chapters that they edited a few years ago, and affordability was one of them because I'm on that committee and I'm always like, but I don't have to fight that. In the beginning, I used to have to be like fighting that. Now they want volunteers to help write that because it's a hot topic, right? It's a growing area of interest. But this is the language in the M1. So if you're looking to use utility speak, they're looking at full cost recovery. That's one of the main principles or objectives of rate design. Revenue stability and predictability. These guys lose sleep at night, If there's a lot of rain, their revenue projections go totally off. Because they set their rate structure based on X amount of people using X thousand gallons of water to water their roses. And if there's a lot of rain, that screws with their revenue projections.
Yeah. Same thing happened in Seattle when they conserved a lot of water, and then our rates had to go up.
Yeah, I have a chart on that we will talk about next.
I did that in California too.
And it's But they do lose sleep at night, and for good reason, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, it's raining so much. How am I going to pay my staff next month? They really do have those worries. And then if you can acknowledge that and empathize, then I think that opens the door to more collaboration, right? But yeah, they do worry about that because they've set their revenue projections based on something. And when there's a drought, they can also get in trouble because sometimes there's a ban on the outdoor irrigation. So the people want to use the water, but they are told by the state, for instance, there's a drought, you can't do any outdoor watering, and it's like, oh my gosh. So they do have issues, but you want to point out to them if they are not doing conservation and efficiency, you want to say, the M1 manual lists that as one of the major objectives of rate setting, right? Because that's their Bible. Equity is also one of the objectives of rate setting. So you might want to remind them about that. You have to bring a copy of this or take a picture of it, So this, and legal and defendable and all that. So, but I want to highlight those two. So equity, this is one of the slides I added this morning, but before I came down here though, but there are different types of equity, all right? So you guys are sort of focused on one type, which is great. The more you use, the more you pay. That's one type of equity, which rate structures do not always allocate the cost like that. So if I do want to water my roses every day and I do want to fill my pool, I should be paying more than a customer who's not doing those things, right? That's one type of equity. Or maybe the type of equity should be whoever has the most money pays the most, despite the fact that they did not fill their pool, because they have more money. I don't know, that's one type of equity too. It's not the way the water systems work right now. The more burden you place on the system, the more you pay. I was gonna come over here and draw something, but I'll just draw it with my fingers because it's dark over there anyway. This is the size of a water utility. This is the amount of capacity they have to have. Let's say it's 3 million gallons of water produced per day. The fact that we all take showers at 7 p.m. means that they don't need 3 million gallons. They need 5 million gallons of capacity per day. Because as residential customers, I'll say we are horrible customers. We all want to use the water at the same time, and then we leave for like from 9 to 6, and we're not using any water in our homes, right? Whereas a commercial customer or an industrial customer, I should say industrial, they're using water on a very predictable pattern. And so that 3 million gallon capacity probably can accommodate that industrial customer. But the plant has to be bigger because we cause peaking, right? Certain types of uses cause peaking. If we all shower at the same time, the capacity has to be sitting there for the rest of the day and the rest of the day because we all want to shower at the same time. Does that make sense? They do wrestle with peaking and it's a real problem for them. If we can help them address peaking, they don't have to do these plant expansions, all right? Intergenerational equity is probably something that you guys have heard about too, but it's talking about the people who benefit from a service or an equipment or an infrastructure upgrade should be the ones that help pay for that service. And we'll talk about, and then there probably we could brainstorm if we had more time, other types of equity or different ways to slice and dice equity, right? It's a big concept. Okay, another thing that they have to struggle with is when they raise rates, their use, the amount of water that they sell goes down. So it's this concept from economics in undergrad or whatever called price elasticity. And we talked last night, somebody mentioned that there's no, forget how she put it, but I say there are no good substitutes for water. You cannot brush your teeth with, you can't brush your teeth with orange juice. That's not gonna work very well. So whereas, instead of orange juice, you could drink tea or water or lemonade. With water, the uses that we have for it, we can't find, I forget the word that you use, but I say substitute. Alternative. Yeah. So I think the economic term is substitutes, right? So when you raise water rates, the amount of water that you sell for your revenue projections, remember you're trying to be a utility director here, is going to go down. It's hard to figure out exactly how much is going to go down, but we say about 3% for every 10% that you raise rates, right? So they have to factor all of this into their revenue projections. Now that AWWA manual, right, the Bible of rate setting, looks at it a little bit differently. They say that people, anyway, will stop watering lawns, etc. And that's true. We can separate the uses of water into two different buckets. No pun intended, right? One is, my puns are always intended actually, but one is discretionary use and the other one is non-discretionary. So using water to brush your teeth or cook in your house, That's not discretionary. You kind of need water for that, and there are no substitutes, etc. But washing your car outside or filling your pool or watering grass, that's discretionary. And so we see changes in that kind of, those types of activities. So this is what we were saying before. So I used to have this as like, this would come up at first. This is the public perception, right? In California, you were saying when there's a drought or some ban and everybody does what they're supposed to do and the citizens conserve and they stop watering the grass, then what comes next really is a rate increase. Because you've totally messed up their revenue projection.
Right.
So this is what the public...
operations costs don't go away.
What's that?
Their operation cost doesn't go away.
Exactly. So I'm preaching to the choir here, which is kind of nice. I'll move along quickly. This was in a newspaper in North Carolina. This is what the public is seeing. We did what you said, and you're just this big fat public water utility that's just shaking these small, us small puny people for every cent that we have. But really, so there was a drought and there was some outdoor restrictions on watering, and they said you cannot water your grass more than once a week or something. And people realized, my goodness, my grass did not die. Like, I don't have to water 3 and 4 times a week. The grass survived. Then the drought is over. Yeah, the utility says you can water as much as you want, and people have learned. And the drought is over here. But their revenue at the utility didn't go up to what they expected, because people were like, wow, the grass does not dry up if you don't water it 5 days a week. So their behavior changed like more permanently. Utility, what's coming next after those, that was back in 2004. What's coming next in 2005? Rate increase. Yeah. And so this is, this is true and this is true. This is what the public is seeing and this is what the utility is dealing with. And to the point, this is why it happens, right? The way we price water, and we've been working on this as an industry to change it. The way we price water in this industry is that most of the costs are fixed, right? So blue is variable. This is the revenue side, and gray is fixed. So all that changes for a water utility in the traditional financing model, and we're trying to change this, all that changes if they sell a ton of water versus a little bit of water is the amount of power and chemicals. That's it. That's all they can kind of have, variable. But they still have to pay, their staff and everything, all their billing costs, and they still have to send you a bill that costs them the same things. So we're trying to fix this a little bit here, right? But that's their reality of what they're dealing with. And I didn't even come up with this chart. The utility director in Charlotte Mecklenburg in North Carolina came up with that. So I'd like to pull.
What's power and chemicals?
That's electricity and chlorine. So if a lot of people didn't buy your water this month because there was a lot of rain, it would be for you. You would save this much in chemicals. You don't have to put as much chlorine in the water. You didn't sell as much water, and you save this much in power. It's very little savings for them if you don't sell a lot of water. But but the other side is flipped. So. Okay, so we talked about rate setting objectives sort of from the AWWA M1 manual, but when a utility is setting its rates, it should look at the specific makeup of the community. Do you have a lot of large families? I'm very concerned, and I need to do some research on this because it's just an opinion right now, but I'm really concerned about how large families are affected by the increasing block rate structures. If you don't know what increasing block rates are, we'll talk about it in a minute. But it's supposed to be a conservation-oriented type of rate structure, which is good, right? We like the environment, so we want them to conserve water. But large families are disproportionately affected. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of the low-income families may be consolidated families and maybe larger households. I don't know. I should check that out. Are there a lot of rentals in your community? Do you have a lot of debt service that you need to repay? So you have, and I recommend ranking these objectives, right? So this is a tool that you can get, I can send it to you, where the water utility leaders, directors, the governing board should actually rank this out. And I'll tell you, I've had them do this exercise in some water leadership training classes, and it's really heartbreaking because affordability, when they have to write it out, affordability is number 4 of these here. Because they need to pay their bills and pay their staff, and so having a board or a governing board actually write this out and then making sure the rate structure they come up with reflects this order of priorities is important. Some of them.
Are you going to be, Stacey?
I'm sorry? Okay, what's that? You said?
It's on 5 to noon.
Okay, I'll wrap up. And I'm supposed to end at noon, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lunch is in here, so you'll see.
Okay. So yeah, it's a good exercise to actually write this out. If I were to ask you, the utility that you're working with, which one of these would they choose? I'm just telling you from my experience, affordability is often last out of these four. Some of them go well together, right? Encouraging conservation and charging a lot for the water, that goes hand in hand. But full cost recovery and affordability, they are hard to achieve both, right? Okay, when you're looking at rate design, you're looking at things like the billing period. It should not be more than 1 month. The bill should come out regularly, ideally. Base charge versus the volumetric charge. I'll talk about these in turn. Rates should be looked at least once a year. You don't have to change them every year, but they should look at their rates at least once a year. So this is kind of ideal. You don't have just one customer class. Some of the smallest ones just have one. You want to have a base charge and a volumetric charge. I'll have a graphic on this in a minute. I'm not a huge fan of increasing block rates, to be honest. I like a good, well-priced, uniform rate. I know I'm getting stares like, what? So if I have an increasing block rate that starts off at $2 per 1,000 gallons, and then when you use 5, it goes up to $3, and after you use 8, it goes up to $4 per 1,000 gallons. That's okay, that's good. That's encouraging conservation. That's increasing nice, complicated, increasing block rate. Think about the utility director who has to project revenues with that kind of rate structure, okay? Think about that. If I say I'm going to do a uniform block rate and it's going to be $5 per 1,000 gallons, which one sends a better price signal? The more expensive one, the $5 per 1,000 gallons versus the $2, then $3, then $4, So, yeah, I like to be controversial, right? So, but I really do think there's something to it. Okay, so this is important. When you ask most utilities what they do for affordability, they'll say they give some water for free, or what I call a consumption allowance, right? So the base charge, that's fixed, that even if you leave for a whole month, you still have to pay this $10 or $20 or whatever. That includes some consumption. That's usually their answer to affordability. And I think they have to go a little bit further. Why? Because everybody gets that break. They price the first couple thousand gallons less than what it costs to really produce it to help with affordability. But the rich people are also getting that break, right? So that gives me a little bit of heartburn, but so that's what this is about. All right, so this is what a uniform rate structure would look like. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to let you guys just look at these. Seasonal rates. In the summer, it's higher, right? This is like a beach community, probably. So the top one is the price per 1,000 gallons, and this one is what the bill is going to look like for a customer, right? Increasing block rates that we just talked about. As you use more water, it goes up. Okay, I'm gonna switch. You guys have these slides. I'll share them with you after to fill in some of the blanks, right? But I'm gonna move ahead really quickly. We answered that already. When it comes to affordability, you ask first, is there an affordability problem? I'm a big proponent and let's not go with feelings and warm fuzzies. What about the old lady and her cat? Is she gonna be able to afford the water after we've had this rate increase? Go with numbers and data and statistics, and we have census information that gives you that. If you have no problem, then great, you're done, at least for now. You don't have a problem for now. Remember I said affordability is just getting worse, right? As rates go up. If you do have a problem, then maybe design a cap, right? These are some types of assistance you have to make. This is Philadelphia's program, and I wanted to ask you guys so you know that it's based on the income. It's the only one in the country like this. The first and the only one, I think, still. I have to tell the utilities, why should you do a customer assistance program? I tell them that it affects their bottom line, right? So the public opinion of the utility might fall, but actually their credit rating agencies that it's the cost for them to borrow money, start not liking when they don't have a lot of repayments, a lot of payments from their customers. So that's what really makes them listen. That's what works on them. Not you want to be nice to your customers usually, right? And a lot of them do want to be nice to their customers, I will say that. But there are real costs to them when people are not paying their bills. If the rates are too high, you want to measure affordability, and I'm going to give you, these are some of the numbers that we heard this morning and where they come from, right? But they're kind of misused. So there are a couple ways to measure affordability. Some of the Environmental Finance Center dashboards have an affordability dial right here, this one. So you can look there and just pull that off of the website. if your state happens to be one of the dozen or so that has a dashboard. All right, and that link is in there. I'm just showing you quickly the resources. This is another Environmental Finance Center tool that I use a lot, and it's pulling census data and looking at affordability for a given community to see what it actually looks like, not with the warm fuzzy feelings, which have a place in life, but maybe not this, right? So what it shows here is if you're making less than $10,000 in that community, you're paying more than 11% of that income on water and sewer. But it's a small sector of the population that makes less than 10,000. EPA likes to look at this middle number here, right? But the community ultimately has to decide if these bars are too high and if they want to develop a customer assistance program. EPA doesn't really tell you, so you'll have to talk about it at the community level, right? But this tool, I'm happy to run this tool for utility. I'm giving that offer. If you have a utility that you're working with and you want me to run this tool, I'll try to do that. And then you can share it with them for discussion, right? There are different ways to attack affordability. You can educate, you can, change the rate that the customer is charged, etc. This was from a good study. Again, I put this slide in here to reference this study from the Water Research Foundation, 2010, but still had some good information. You have to decide if assistance is needed. If so, who gets it, etc. Those are the decision points with designing a customer assistance program. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Tell the utility that. They should not be like saying, well, if you make $15,000. No, there are already existing programs like the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. Piggyback off of those to decide who gets your help. All right? This is the minimal thing that I was showing you. Everybody gets the break for the first couple thousand. And this is an example from Alabama, where in Alabama, at least this is an old slide, 2016, a lot of the water utilities, like 300 of them, were offering about 1,000 to 2,000 gallons of water free without base charge, right? That's a southeastern thing. I think in the west and stuff, it's not as popular, but it does help with affordability for everybody, even the rich people. So, but it's easy to implement, right? And with affordability programs, what we've seen, a lot of them, they've gone through the fight to develop an affordability program, and they don't do the proper outreach, and nobody signs up for the affordability program, and then they say, like, see, we told you. They don't even care, or we don't have an affordability program because nobody signed up. Outreach is very important and very difficult. Low-income customers are by definition hard to reach. And so there was one study, this one by the Water Research Foundation, again, that I was a subcontractor on, that looked at the outreach. If you have a bill stuffer in your bill, and most of your low-income folks are not getting a bill directly because they're tenants or they're in an apartment building, that bill stuffer is not going to reach the right people. If the bill stuffer is in English, and you have a huge Spanish population or a huge Burmese population, it's in English, you're not going to reach them. They're not going to sign up for the program because they don't understand what your bill stuffer says, right? So funding for affordability is important, and that's, I think Sylvia was mentioning this, what I call pathways report, and lunch is here and we can smell it, so I'm going to finish up in a minute here. This is how you get that report. So if you get maybe you'll get a PDF of this and you can click on that and get to the report. It contains a 1 or 2 page summary on each state. Georgia and Alabama fight over water quite a bit, so I have to explain why Alabama is there. It's just the first state. And what this report found is very confusing for a utility in any state to figure out, can I use some of my revenues from some of my customers to help the low-income ones? This idea, they will call it, escaping me right now, a subsidy. And cross-subsidization, those are like 4-letter words. They don't want to do that. Historically, right? So we have to get them across that hurdle. If they can do that in a state, it's very hard to figure out. And so that's what this Pathways project tried to figure out. And we found we couldn't figure it out half the times either, right? But we did try to classify each state as it's explicitly authorized and okay to use rate revenue to help your low-income customers, or it's not. Most states are somewhere in between, right? You can see the numbers there. These maps are available online, and they may have changed a little bit. You see very few red states and very few bright green states. Most people are in the middle. It's confusing.
Which one?
So,
Which?
okay, white. Try to skip over that. Okay, so there are 2 maps, right? Non-commission regulated and commission regulated. So Stacey last night was talking about, basically they wanted to move your utility from a commission regulated to a non-commission regulated in California. Different rules in every single state about what is commission regulated and what is not. And these are for the non-commission regulated. The rules are different, right? So that report is available. We don't want to just tell you the problem that is ambiguous. We want to tell you how you can address it, right? So lobby at the state level to clarify the language. If a state decides we do not want utilities to use their rate revenue to help low-income customers, at least put that in there. Make it clear, right? But we prefer if they change it to you can, like Indiana did. Indiana, at the same time we were doing this, they clarified state statutes to make it very explicitly clear that you can do this. Seattle, Washington State always had it. They always said part of rate setting is helping low-income customers.
Can you go back one slide? What was the red?
The red is the states that specifically prohibit use of rate revenue to help low-income customers. California is messed up, and I usually have a slide on that. For the commission-regulated state utilities in California, they have to have a low-income customer assistance program. And in that same state, for the non-commission-regulated one, they can't. Like it's wrong and illegal for them. So they have to clear that up. I know California is confusing, and that's one slide that I usually have that shows how confusing it is, right? So these are some workarounds. Tell the state to clarify it. Develop an argument about why. So Georgia has done this. Well, I should say Atlanta has done this. They have changed their language and stuff to say, we conform and look how, but they're using $1 million in rate revenue to help low-income customers now. But they found some way around it. And then just where it's impossible, you just say, have to use funding from somewhere else besides rate revenue. This report, called the Pathways Report for short by me, that's something that I worked on this report. I mean, I was the lead researcher, and it took a lot of work, and it was funded by 8 different water associations. But
I know the Suez one.
yeah, it's a robust report. But anyway, in Georgia, this is an example of a workaround. There's something called the gift clause in each state. In Georgia, it's the gratuities clause. It has the most teeth in Georgia compared to any other state, where if they give money, it's considered a bribe to give money to low-income customers through a help on the field. But Atlanta has worked through it, and this is kind of the process that they have followed. If your utility is pointing out hurdles, Atlanta has overcome a lot of them, and now they use, in 2016, 1 million of their revenues were put aside for the Care and Conserve program, which is the Affordability Assistance Program, okay? So it can be done, they're doing it. Read the case study, and this is how. They changed city code in order to say, we are not going against this gratuities clause, You do what you have to do. So here are a couple examples. This was by EPA from a few years ago. This is the M1 manual with the updated chapter on affordability that I tried to put all of these things in so that you can, use them with the utilities you're working with. I added this slide this morning because Sylvia was talking about NAPA so much, and this is a picture of that NAPA report. That's good. I would say the audience for NAPA was more the federal government, like telling them what to do in terms of affordability. So it may not be as useful to you guys, but it's
I think there's some good reference material.
it does, yeah.
But it is, the audience wasn't the general public. It is online.
Except the federal government isn't going to do anything until we tell them, hey, did you read this in the NAPA report, right? So how much a cap costs gets important. Just want to point out that there's a free tool in Excel available online. If they say, okay, fine, I'll listen to you and I'll consider doing an affordability program, but that's going to be expensive, not necessarily, and this tool helps you work that out to get a rough cost. So this is the sort of the process. Remember, we reviewed this before, right? The decision, and that's it. And food break. I don't know do we have any time for questions now?
I have a comment and it's not like what you presented. Obviously, if they want their revenues constantly increase, the budget is going to not decrease, then our rates are going to constantly increase. It doesn't sound like there's any way to do conservation. You say, I'm going to use less water. Like, oh, they're using less water. We need to pay these, fees and revenue. We're going to increase. So is there a way for things to decrease?
That is $1 million question. But it's been described like this, right? So if we raise that base charge, which I didn't talk to you guys very much about, the charge that you pay despite how much water you use, it kind of spreads the cost a little bit more. But it doesn't send as good of a conservation message. because I didn't wash my car this month because I thought my bill was too high last month.
Right.
But if that base charge is such a big part of your bill, not washing your car, you won't see a big difference in your bill next month. And so that's the downside of that. But the water utilities love a high base charge because they sleep better at night because their revenue isn't as dependent on how much water they sell. It's an idea called decoupling. It's very important in the electricity sector and gas as well. It's complicated. But there are different models, and I can send you a paper that we had done with some crazy models that we've seen a couple utilities. I mean, why aren't water utilities like co-ops, right?
Yeah.
Why don't they charge like cell phone companies? We have, and we've actually applied actual utility data to a couple of those. There's another one that I really like called peak set base model. So remember that peaking thing? You know, we use water more at certain months.
Right.
We use more water more at certain times of the day. If we can get customers to behave better and not peak as much, then they should get a break. So they will get more money back at the end as a co-op because they use less water. So there are some ways, but it's not easy.
Is there any examples of universal base water use before the base charge comes in? A basic water, you know, like universal basic incomes being tried in various communities in this country and abroad. Is there any universal basic water?
Not that I know of, only if we want to count that consumption allowance with the base charge. That's the closest thing. But if you want to give me your card, I will touch base with you as well. I can send you that paper if you can give me a card.
Yeah.